Believe it or not, the Dodgers are close to making another signing, and it's another reliever, and his name is Kirby Yates. What does that mean for the bullpen? What does that mean for the roster? We'll get into it. Let's get locked on Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. This is the daily podcast covering the World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. You can find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube. All you got to do is search for Locked On Dodgers. You can become an everydayer by listening or watching every day. You can make that easier by subscribing and getting notified when our episodes are ready, or when we are going live on YouTube like we are here on Tuesday night. If this is your first time listening or watching, welcome. I'm Vince Samperio. That's Jeff Snyder, and we are Locked On Dodgers. We've been doing this podcast here going into year 7, and Jeff and I have both covered the Dodgers in a few different ways over the years, 11 years to be exact. And we've been Dodger fans our whole life. So there's obviously a lot of Dodgers in our lives and continue to be a lot of Dodgers in our lives. And yesterday, I guess jokingly, we ended the show asking for the Dodgers to just make another move. So we had something to talk about. And I guess Andrew Friedman watches because the Dodgers made another move, Jeff, or close to another move.
Yeah. The thing my first thought this morning was, I'm glad that we didn't get to the Kirby Yates talk yesterday, because after you and I finished our show last night, we said, okay, now tomorrow there's that MLB trade rumors report that the Dodgers had been linked to Kirby Yates before they signed Tanner Scott. And what I said to you was, MLB trade rumors says there's still a chance the Dodgers might go after Kirby Yates too. I don't think that's going to happen. And if we had gotten to that last night on the show, that would have broken my streak of being right this offseason. Luckily, we didn't get to it because apparently, Dodgers apparently signing Kirby Yates. It's not official yet. In fact, the only person who's reported it as it's going to happen is Bob Nightingale. Everybody else has been like, they're deep in conversations, they're close, whatever. And it could just be because it would be pending a physical, as you do when you're signing a 38-year-old guy with the injury history. It seems like Dodgers getting Kirby Yates too. And, I guess we'll talk in the next segment about part of the Dodgers reasoning, which is that apparently Michael Kopech is going to miss the first month or so of the season, which is something we didn't know about. And so that kind of explains it a little bit. Kirby Yates, I didn't think it was going to happen, but it looks like it's going to.
Yeah. Nightingale did say pending physical, so that may just be what everyone else is saying in different words. Like you said, I would imagine physical is going to tell the Dodgers something that could affect, compensation or incentives or stuff like that. So that's probably the main holdup. But, what are the Dodgers getting in Kirby Yates? They're getting a guy who has been really good in the past and was really, really good last year. And a guy that can close or, doesn't have to close. I would imagine he's fine not closing out games. But somebody that gives them another upper echelon arm in that bullpen, somebody that, didn't pitch March to November last year, like we talked about when they signed Tanner Scott, and, another weapon for the Dodgers. And we talked about Kenley Jansen in yesterday's episode and how it didn't make sense for this roster just because, he's not a significant upgrade over the bottom guy in the Dodgers totem pole right now in terms of bullpen and along with acquisition costs and all that type of stuff. Money at the end of the day doesn't truly matter, but still has some semblance of matter. But Kirby Yates, he slots into top 3 arms in the Dodgers bullpen realistically, and somebody that will pitch in the 8th and 9th inning probably a lot during the season, and somebody to we don't have any figures yet in terms of dollars. We don't have any of that. But at this point, like January 21st, the fact that he hasn't signed yet means that he probably hasn't got a deal that he really wanted or a team that he really wanted. And maybe that team was the Dodgers.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the funny things about this whole thing. Every time the Dodgers sign somebody and the world explodes, and it's like, well, look what the calendar says, and how come Kirby Yates is still available? And the fact that right now, Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman and Jack Flaherty are all still available. And it's like, the Dodgers gave you 3 months to sign Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates, and it didn't happen. So, all right, yeah, it's just like when the Dodgers signed Freddie Freeman. Like, we're waiting, Braves. You're gonna bring back your guy. You're not bringing him back. All right, we'll take your Hall of Fame first baseman off your hands. Kirby Yates specifically, he absolutely, in like you're talking about, contrast to Kenley Jansen, he makes this bullpen better because he is a significant upgrade over whoever's roster spot he's taking. It will also probably be a short-term deal. I would guess 1 year, maybe an option for a second year, but like he's a year older than Clayton Kershaw. But the thing I like about Kirby Yates is he's probably going to be either really good or hurt. And that's kind of what the Dodgers are building this pitching staff on. We have guys, yes, there's a lot of injury risk. There's a lot of that, but when they're healthy, they're going to be really good. And that's the starters and the relievers. And if you've got, the Dodgers have some built-in injury risk, and that will open up some chances for guys like Edgardo Enriquez and other young guys like that throughout the season. But when Kirby Yates is healthy, he's going to be good. And the goal will be if we can get of these 7 super awesome high leverage relievers, if we can get 5 of them healthy in October, they won the World Series last year with no starting pitching and fewer than 5 healthy elite relievers. They got the job done. So I think that's kind of their business model here. And Andrew Friedman warned everybody. He said, my goal is to not have to buy at the trade deadline. And so he's going out and getting everybody he thinks he might need in July. Let's get them right now. And it kind of lines up, like I said, we're going to talk about Kopech. You look at the timeline of the time Kopech's going to miss, it might end up lining up somewhat close to when Shohei Ohtani becomes a two-way player again. And then at that point, suddenly you can have an 8-man bullpen again, even with your 6-man rotation. And so, it could just be, all right, well, this is kind of locking in that 8th guy. And then you've got Bruce Gratterall coming back. It's like, now we got 9 good relievers. What are we going to do then? But that's tomorrow's problem, and definitely a good problem to have if you're the Dodgers.
Yeah, and you look at Yates, and you try to see, how good is he? And he's had an interesting career. I mean, 2018, 2019, he broke out with the Padres. Led the league in saves in 2019, and then 2020 got hurt. Wasn't pitching that well. Before he got hurt, he might have been hurt already. Didn't play all of 21. And then 22, 23, he was just okay. Bad in 22, coming back from injury. Okay in 23. Really good last year. And maybe, that's kind of the Kirby Yates it is. If he's healthy, he's good, like you just mentioned. And last year, the 1.17 ERA stands out. You look at FIP, even the FIP, 2.50, outperformed a little bit. But, again, he's not going to be the Dodgers for sure closer. I would imagine it's going to be. We'll probably talk about this at some point in this week of how do they attack. But he struck out 36% of hitters last year. His Baseball Savant page is very, very red in terms of whiff percentage, strikeout percentage, his fastball value, his expected ERA, expected batting average. Like, other than fastball velocity, and he's not amazing with walks, he's all you could really ask for out of a reliever. And, and if it doesn't work out, I'm sure it's going to be a 1 or 2 year deal. If it does work out, the Dodgers have 3 legitimate, well, maybe 4 if you add in Kopech the way he pitched when the Dodgers got him, 4 legitimate guys that are like closers. And then the rest of the bullpen is guys that are Vesia and Banda and, Gratterall when he comes back, and whoever moves down from the starting staff, and, Ryan Brazier, who we'll probably talk about at some point later in this episode. Like, there's a lot of different arms and ways to get guys out.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that Yates and Tanner Scott and Blake Snell all kind of fit a similar mold of strike out a lot of dudes, a lot of weak contact, and probably too many walks. And yet they all prove that as long as you're not giving up hits to go with the walks, you can survive just fine like that.
Yeah, strikeouts are a big thing. We've talked about it. We were a little concerned last year because of that in terms of the Dodgers bullpen, but they got the job done and now they got better. So, what does it mean though? Because the Dodgers signed Tanner Scott, they signed Kirby Yates, and then we got some news about Michael Kopech maybe not being 100% healthy. We'll talk about that. So make sure to keep it locked on Dodgers. Today's episode is brought to you by Select Quote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from Select Quote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family future secure. Select Quote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets Select Quote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedon. Select Quote. They shop, you save. I want to thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day, last listen of the day, any listen of your day. We realize it's Tuesday at 9 o'clock. So if you're watching right now, it might be your last listen of the day. But there's some of you that don't listen till the morning, and it might be your first listen of the day. Whatever listen, we appreciate it. And if you're not an everydayer already, you can become one by listening or watching every day. If you're already on YouTube and you need something else to watch, Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles are two 24/7 streaming channels from the Locked On Podcast Network that bring you the biggest news and stories from the sports world and the LA sports world. All right, Jeff. So to go along with the good news of Kirby Yates, we got some, I guess, slightly concerning to potentially more concerning news about Michael Kopech. Bob Nightingale tweeted that he's expected to miss the first month of the season, which is really the first we've heard of this when it comes to Kopech. Fabian Ardaya had an article a little bit later talking about that Kopech was going through some forearm soreness or issues in the postseason, but they weren't concerned that it was inflammation and not necessarily any structural damage. But it did make me think like they're hedging their bets a little bit that Michael Kopech might not survive this season, considering that that's what happens with guys that throw as hard as he does.
Yeah, and Kopech is a guy who it makes sense. You look at his career, he used to be a starter and struggled a lot as a starter. But even as a starter, he never threw. His career high in innings pitched is 129 and a third. And then they moved him to the bullpen this last year, and he threw 67 innings. It like you said, he throws crazy hard. It might just be, especially with a guy who's already had Tommy John surgery, might just be a case of we don't want Michael Kopech to throw 7 months. We want him to have basically he's never been on a playoff team before until 2024. He's never. I guess the White Sox did make it. How many times did he pitched in the playoffs in 2021? But that's he's not really built up for a 7-month season. He is what we used to call a second division guy. The people who just only play the games they get paid for, the 6-month regular season, and then they go home. And so I think probably Kopech and a lot of other pitchers, the Dodgers are thinking, all right, we're doing a 6-month schedule, even a 5-month schedule for some of these guys, and try to have as many of them have one of those months be October as possible. And so like we know Gratterall is missing the first half of the season. Kopech's missing the first month or so. We don't really know if that means he will be ready to pitch in the big leagues after a month, or if he's not throwing for the first month of the season and then he will, ramp up. And, Don't know for sure. I assume it means he'd be ready to pitch in the big leagues after a month, and so he'll start spring training around the time that everybody else ends it, something like that. But yeah, all these guys, these relievers who you look at their histories, if they really sign Kirby Yates, yeah, he's a guy who probably, with his injury history, his age, will probably take a month off at some point during the season. And definitely in the starting rotation, but even in the bullpen, some of these guys, whether it's because they need to give guys like Enriquez and Casparius and those guys some big league innings on the starting rotation, if it's just because they need to make room for Clayton Kershaw. But I think the dual benefit of all of this will be we got a ton of arms, which means that we don't have to use any of them for the full 7 months straight.
Yeah, and like I said, it's one of those where coming off a couple years now in a row where injuries became a big thing, like you want to have we've talked about before. Friedman said he doesn't really want to have to deal at the deadline, and the best way to kind of go against that is to stack your team with a lot of depth. And it's not always the easiest thing to do, because if you have a lot of major league talent as depth, they're probably not able to or want to sit in the minor leagues or be injured. But with the Dodgers, that we've talked about phantom ILs a few times, but most of the time it doesn't necessarily happen. Or what they are giving us is stuff that probably makes sense, like guys' elbows are sore, or arms are sore, or forearm, whatever it is. And then you look at in the postseason, Alex Vesia, his injury probably not a long-term thing, but he is a guy that gets amped up and could always tweak himself again, celebrating a big strikeout or something. Evan Phillips had a little bit of arm issue. We would imagine that it's not something that's going to cost them this season, but once that kind of flares up there, you have a little bit of thoughts of how that can, progress into next season. And, now with Michael Kopech and, everything else. And you don't want to get to a point where, okay, you don't sign Kirby Yates, you don't sign Sandra Scott because you think our bullpen's good. And then, Phillips goes down, Blake Trinan goes down for however long. And then, as good as Henriquez could be, you don't know. And now you might have to throw him, or you might have to get down to Jack Dreyer or Michael Grove or other guys on the 40-man roster that aren't basically the same as last year, where you're throwing guys in situations that you have no idea what's going to happen. Or you're picking up guys and you have no idea what they're going to do. You could get Anthony Bonder, you could get Yohan Ramirez. You just don't know.
Yeah, and that phrase "phantom IL" gets thrown around a lot, and the version of the phantom IL that Major League Baseball is cracking down on is making up injuries. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. That the Dodgers, the way they've constructed this roster, they don't need to make up injuries. There won't be phantom IL stints. There will be, this guy, if it was October, yes, he would pitch through this, like Michael Kopech apparently did in the World Series. But because it's May or July, it makes sense to give this guy who has a legitimate physical issue, makes sense to give him time off. And that's something that, there it's kind of a running joke in baseball that by the time September rolls around, every Major League Baseball player has something that they could legitimately be put on the IL for. There's always nicks and cuts and bruises and scrapes and everything. And pitchers even more so. And this particular Dodgers roster even more so than that. And so that's what we're going to see. I would guess that Shohei Ohtani will be the only Dodgers starter who doesn't spend any time on the IL this year. But even he will probably have, I don't know, maybe not, since he's not pitching the first month or month and a half of the season. Maybe they won't feel a need to, but I wouldn't be surprised if in August or September they say, let's skip a start here for Ohtani. I haven't looked at the schedule, but if there's a week where there are 2 off days, and so, all right, let's skip Shohei this start, give him a little bit of a breather, just because that's, they really do try to set things up for October, and it almost never works. Last year, it didn't work at all, yet they still won the World Series. But then other times it has worked, that they line up and, these guys who weren't healthy during the year, they're healthy now in October when we need them. And then there's like the 2021, the worst case scenario when everybody's healthy, and then suddenly the last series of the season, Max Muncy and Clayton Kershaw both got hurt. But that seems to be, all of this seems geared towards let's make sure Michael Kopech and as many other good pitchers as possible are available in October.
Yeah, and you're heading into the season with a loaded team more so than usual, where the bullpen at this point, there'll be competition, but there'll all be competition of legitimate major league caliber guys fighting for a playoff or a bullpen spot. And even in the rotation, guys that have had major league success before, but just coming back a little bit from injury. But again, they're going to be fighting for like a 5 and 6 spot, not the 2, 3, 4 spot. So there's a lot to like about the Dodgers roster, but there's also some moves they are going to need to make for sure, and some potential moves that could happen just to keep roster flexibility in general. We'll get into that, so make sure to keep it locked on Dodgers. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Live events are fun, and if you are like me and live in Los Angeles, there's a lot of live events to get into. If you're somewhere else, there's probably a lot of live events to get into as well, and Game Time can help you get into those events, and they've made it even easier now because they've introduced their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You know what? You're going to go to a game and you want to be able to see the players sweat. And so you can use Game Time Picks, and you can sit closer, filter out all the fluff, get the great seats that are down on the court or on the ice or on the floor or whatever you're watching, and see those players sweat, or whatever you want to see, or whatever concert you want to go to, or whatever comedy show you want to go to, or whatever theater you want to go to. Game Time is here to help you out. And, I have someone that has the Game Time app, and I've used it before, and I've gotten tickets at great deals. And you can feel confident in buying because they have, if you find tickets in your same section and row, you can get 110% of the difference credited towards you. So Game Time takes care of you in a lot of different ways. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account on the Game Time app and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. I want to thank you for being an everydayer. If you are one, an everydayer is just someone that listens or watches every day. You can become one by starting to listen and watch every day. We got 5 episodes a week. Whether that's Sunday through Thursday live most of the time, or Monday through Friday listening where we get podcasts, or rewatching on YouTube. If you're not an everyday, or you're not ready for that type of commitment, just go ahead and add 1 a week. And, if you're at 1 or 2, you can get it to 3 or 4, and you continue on and on until you get to 5. So we appreciate you. And remember, you can always go beyond the podcast, become a Locked On Dodgers Insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. Get text directly from us regarding Dodgers news, updates, and all that type of good stuff. And, get an invite to an exclusive Discord with other Dodger fans where you can talk Dodgers, where you could discuss the Dodgers and the impending roster moves they need to make. Roki Sasaki, there may be a press conference for Roki Sasaki and or Tanner Scott on Wednesday at Dodger Stadium. Hasn't been announced to the media, or at least not all the media yet, but there's good authority that it's going to happen. I think Sports in LA has it on TV. I think Jeff found out that's going to happen. So there's some happening tomorrow, which would mean nothing at the moment because the Dodgers won't have to clear any roster spots by then. But once the Kirby Yates signing becomes official, they would have to clear a 40-man roster spot because there would be at 40 with Tanner Scott on board. So we can talk about the initial 40-man roster move to clear for Kirby Yates, but also in general, do the Dodgers need to clear some other spots or just remove a little bit of the logjam with that?
Yeah, it seems like I'll say this while knocking on wood. It seems like after Kirby Yates, the Dodgers are probably done in free agency for this offseason, but I thought they were done in free agency after Tanner Scott. And that's with the understanding that there's still a very good chance, I think, that Kike Hernandez comes back, but I think that won't happen during the offseason. I think that'll happen early in spring training when it's much easier to make room on the 40-man roster. And so really it is just the one spot probably that they need to make available. And that could go a few different ways. And some of that comes down to, even though there aren't necessarily needs from a 40-man roster standpoint, like if you start looking at who realistically has a chance to play, like, do you think James Outman has a chance to actually play in the big leagues in 2025? If not, he's probably trade bait. Do you think Michael Grove has a realistic chance to play? If not, he's probably trade bait. And even guys like Dustin May, do you think there's value for him now in the last year before free agency? He doesn't have any options available, so he has less roster flexibility. Does it make sense to trade him? I still think most of those decisions, at least the Outman and Dustin May decisions, I think would come more likely during spring training and any trades like that. Michael Grove and Ryan Brazier, for me, are kind of the two guys who seem, since they both are kind of the odd man out in all this addition of relievers, maybe a trade of one of those guys, or even, I guess we saw with Diego Cartaya, they can just DFA a guy and then they have a week to trade him. I go back and forth whether I think that removes your leverage in a trade. And so maybe they wouldn't do that with somebody who's actually a major leaguer like these guys. But it's I have a hard time seeing them just cutting somebody to make room for Yates. It seems like it would have to be a trade. And I still keep going back to, I feel like Michael Grove would make a lot of sense to trade in a trade similar to the Michael Busch trade from last year, not getting quite as much back, of course, but that same type of, let's trade him for a couple guys who aren't on the 40-man roster. It kills a couple birds with one stone, helps replenish the farm system, and makes room on the 40-man roster for Kirby Yates.
Yeah, the initial move, that does seem to be like the two guys for an initial move. And I go back and forth on which one it would be. Michael Grove could have more trade value in the sense of he has team control and he's younger and he's shown himself to be good in one inning stints at times. How's good in, baseball savant page doesn't look terrible. Ryan Brazier, you're trading for an older guy who was really bad before he got to the Dodgers. And even last year, wasn't quite as good as he was the year before. And is going to be a free agent after this season. So less value. But then you go towards flexibility, and Michael Grove has an option, and Kirby Yates and Ryan Brazier doesn't. And you think the Dodgers could want that flexibility on the roster, but it's, at what point does having somebody that could be worse as a pitcher, but the availability to go up and down between the minors and majors, like, does that really have that much extra value than Ryan Brazier, who could bring actual value in terms of pitching and all that type of stuff, and essentially becomes a little bit, Ryan Brazier at this point, with the way the rest of the roster is, assuming you get a good, decent amount of health, becomes a little bit of, if he makes it through the season and he pitches well, cool. But if he starts being bad, there's no reason not to let him go if we need to. So I go both ways. I think for tomorrow, or not tomorrow, I guess when they get to Kirby Yates' part, I could see them getting rid of Brazier, I guess.
Yeah, I could see that. I guess one other possibility would be just holding off on the Kirby Yates signing, making it official until they get to spring training. That's actually what they did with Brian Brazier last year. We didn't even know Brazier was coming back until he was just suddenly there the first day of spring training. And he's, oh yeah, I've been back. We're just waiting for room on the roster. And so they could go that route. It's still a few weeks away, so probably not, but that's a possibility. But yeah,
what's up? What is it? 5 spots that 5 guys that can go on 60?
Technically 5, more likely 4, just because you've got the I can't remember all of them right now off the top of my head. Gavin Stone,
River Ryan, Gavin Stone, Kyle Hurt, Brusdar Gratterall, and
whoever the 5th one is.
Yeah.
Kyle Hurt, though, is one that I don't think they'll put him on the 60-day because he got hurt in the minor leagues. And so they would have to promote him to the big leagues to put him on the 60-day IL, which means he would be accruing big league service time while he's hurt, whereas right now he's not. It's kind of the same thing with Nick Frosso last year. They never did put Nick Frosso on the 60-day IL because they would have had to put him in the big leagues first. And so I assume we're looking at the same kind of thing. Is Emmett Sheehan the other one?
Yeah.
I assume we're dealing with the same thing where they will probably not put Kyle Hurt on the 60-day IL. So there's up to 4 spots. And, when you look at Kike Hernandez, Clayton Kershaw, that's some of them. And then you just kind of go from there. But it seems like since there's a little bit of fat they need to trim on the 40-man roster anyway, just as far as realistic usage, that's probably what they'll do.
Yeah. And then we'll start getting, we'll start hearing of guys, more non-roster invitees, maybe not as much as years past. But, the Dodgers do need some positional depth in the minors, whether they have a very good, 1 through 13 on the active roster. But beyond that, when you get into AAA, Don Rushing's one guy that would be the next man up type of deal. But, he's very limited in what he can play at the moment. And, we'll probably start seeing some of these guys that will play in OKC probably most of the year, or if not all the year, but could find their way to the Dodgers just because they don't. There's a lot of pitchers on the 40-man roster. I know a lot of them are going to go on the 60-day IL realistically once that is available to them, but they don't necessarily have the depth at position players. They have the depth on the major league roster, not the depth in the organization at the moment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Jeff. So you got anything else to add?
Just a couple of housekeeping things. Like we said, most likely the Roki Sasaki and Tanner Scott press conferences on Wednesday. Sasaki has to be official by Thursday. That's the end of his posting period. So makes sense. He was at the Laker game tonight. We know he's a big basketball fan, got a Magic Johnson signed jersey as part of the recruitment process. Also this weekend, Anthony Bonda is doing a meet and greet thing. And if you head over to DodgerYard.com, sign up there. It's a free account, and there's a giveaway for a meet and greet with Anthony Bonda, a ticket to that event, basically. So check that out. Always fun to. I remember going to get Don Sutton's autograph at a car dealership when I was like 8 years old, and it's always fun seeing these players in the wild.
Yeah, Dodgers officially announced Fan Fest will be on February 1st at Dodger Stadium in the parking lot. It was no longer a free event. As of last year, the price doubled to $20 with some of the proceeds going towards California wildfire help. There's a lot of different things you can check out, Dodgers.com. But yeah, Fan Fest will be here, and it is February 1st. And we will hear from a lot of Dodgers, maybe get some answers out if we don't get those in the next couple of days from press conferences, and we'll see what happens with this roster. So at the very least, we'll probably have something to talk about tomorrow. And, the Dodgers, who knows, maybe they'll sign somebody else that we don't expect, or make a trade that we don't expect, or do something that we don't expect. And, we'll be talking about it and how great it is to be a Dodger fan. So,
as long as they don't sign somebody who I said they're not going to.
Yeah, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day. Make sure to find us wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. All you got to do is search for Locked On Dodgers. You can subscribe to get notified when our episodes are ready or when we're going live on YouTube. And you can find Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles on YouTube. Those are 2 24/7 streaming channels from the Locked On Podcast Network. You can go beyond the podcast, become a Locked On Dodgers Insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. Get text directly from us and get invited to an exclusive Discord talking Dodgers. You can find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Locked On Dodgers. Jeff's on Twitter at SnyDog. I'm at Vincents91. You can DM us any questions or comments. You can also send those via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or via voicemail. Text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car, if you're at home, text My Advice Play Podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.